What will happen to Donald Trump if Poland demands answers on Epstein ties? What happens when a foreign ally decides to shine a light on one of America's darkest scandals? Imagine this. Poland, a nation that has stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States through NATO, through global crises, suddenly turning to Donald Trump and asking, point blank, about his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. The very question itself would send shockwaves across Washington and ripple through international diplomacy. Would Trump stonewall and deflect as he so often does, or would Poland's demand for transparency force new details into the public eye? This isn't just about scandal. It's about credibility, alliances, and whether Trump can withstand the mounting global pressure. Stay tuned as we break it down right now. When the president of Poland sat beside Donald Trump in the Oval Office, the cameras were meant to capture an image of unity and alliance. Instead, they recorded a moment of chaos. Trump erupted into a rambling defense against accusations tied to Jeffrey Epstein, branding the scandal a Democrat hoax and ridiculing survivors who have demanded accountability. He insisted repeatedly that the Epstein files are irrelevant and that Americans should be talking instead about what he called the most successful 8 months of any presidency in history. Yet his tone was defensive, his claims contradictory, and his body language unsettled. The question now echoes beyond Washington. What happens if Poland itself, a NATO ally and a nation with its own history of demanding truth from the powerful, presses Trump for direct answers on Epstein? The significance of this scenario cannot be overstated. This is not simply about whether a foreign leader raises an uncomfortable question. It is about whether Trump can withstand a moment where international partners refuse to play along with his narrative. If Poland demands transparency, the ripple effects could shake Trump's credibility in diplomacy, expose him to heightened legal scrutiny, and weaken his already fragile image on the world stage. To understand these stakes, we must unpack the press conference itself, situate Poland's role in the transatlantic alliance, and explore the consequences that could unfold if Warsaw takes a stand. Trump's meltdown began with a boast and quickly spiraled into denial. He declared that his administration had achieved unprecedented success. Therefore, it was absurd to waste time discussing Epstein. This framing immediately exposed the contradiction at the heart of his response. By calling the Epstein revelations a hoax, Trump sought to erase the voices of survivors and to delegitimize congressional efforts to release files. At the very moment women were standing at a Capitol Hill press conference describing the trauma they endured, Trump was on live television dismissing them as fabrications. Reporters did not relent. One-sided Representative Thomas Massey's push to bring Epstein documents to a House vote, noting that even if Trump himself was not directly implicated, some of his close associates and donors might be. This detail struck a nerve. Trump's tone sharpened. He accused Democrats of manufacturing a witch hunt designed to distract from his victories. He invoked the Kennedy assassination documents as a parallel, claiming that no matter how many files are released, critics will always demand more. The performance revealed a deeper truth. Trump understands that the Epstein files are radioactive not only for him personally, but for his network of political and financial allies. As the exchange continued, Trump meandered into foreign policy, bragging that he had ended 7 wars. When pressed on his failure to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine, he admitted it was hard stuff and more complicated than expected. The contrast was stark. On one hand, he inflated his achievements. On the other, he confessed to naive miscalculations. To sit beside the president of Poland, a country living with the direct consequences of Russian aggression, and to shrug that war was harder than expected was more than a gaffe. It was a signal of weakness. Layered on top of his dismissals of the Epstein scandal, it painted a picture of a leader unable to focus, unable to offer clarity, and unwilling to take responsibility. Poland is not a passive backdrop in this drama. As a frontline state in NATO, it faces existential threats from Russia and has historically valued truth-telling in political life. Polish society carries deep memories of both Nazi occupation and Soviet domination. From the Solidarity movement to contemporary debates over rule of law, Poles are acutely sensitive to the dangers of cover-ups, authoritarianism, and moral corruption. If Poland were to demand answers from Trump on Epstein, it would not simply be a diplomatic irritant. It would be a moral stance grounded in the nation's own history of resistance to secrecy and abuse. Poland also occupies a strategic position within the alliance. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Warsaw has become a central hub for Western military support to Kiev. Its voice in NATO is amplified, its influence in European debates magnified. For Trump to sit beside Poland's president and call Epstein a hoax while fumbling on Ukraine is to risk alienating a partner who cannot be ignored. If Polish leaders were to signal publicly that they expect transparency from Trump, the impact would resonate not only in Warsaw but across Europe. Allies in Germany, France, and the Baltic states would interpret it as a cue that Trump is unfit for serious leadership. If Poland demands answers, several risks converge. First is the legal dimension. The Epstein files involve powerful figures across industries and borders. Survivors have testified about trafficking that crossed international lines. If a NATO ally like Poland insists on transparency, it raises the possibility of joint investigations or intelligence sharing that could expose new details. Trump cannot easily dismiss such moves as partisan witch hunts. When a foreign ally presses for clarity, the partisan frame collapses. It becomes an international matter. Second is the diplomatic risk. Trump has long framed himself as a deal-maker who commands respect abroad, but to be confronted publicly by Poland on an issue as sensitive as Epstein would reveal vulnerability. It would demonstrate that even allies are skeptical of his explanations. Such a moment could damage trust not only in Eastern Europe, but also within the broader Western alliance. Diplomats in Brussels and London would note carefully whether Trump can withstand pressure without collapsing into denial. Third is the political risk. Trump's base may rally behind him when he cries hoax, but international condemnation is harder to spin. American voters who are less partisan may see such a confrontation as evidence that Trump is toxic on the world stage. For a candidate seeking to project strength, the image of being pressed by Poland on Epstein could be devastating. The Epstein scandal remains one of the most corrosive, unresolved stories in American politics. Jeffrey Epstein was not just a criminal, he was a connector, a man who moved between elites in finance, politics, and royalty. The survivors' demands for accountability are not going away. Every delay in releasing files only fuels suspicion that powerful figures are being protected. For Trump, the stakes are particularly high. He was photographed with Epstein on multiple occasions. He once praised Epstein as a terrific guy. While Trump later distanced himself, the association lingers. By branding the entire scandal a Democrat hoax, Trump risks alienating not only survivors, but also the public who recognize the seriousness of sex trafficking. To dismiss victims as part of a hoax is to attack credibility at its most fragile point. If Poland, a country with its own commitment to combating human trafficking, were to challenge Trump, the optics would be brutal. Imagine a Polish journalist asking on international television whether Trump believes Polish victims of trafficking are also hoaxes. Such a moment would pierce the rhetorical armor Trump relies upon. The broader danger is that Trump's denials may inspire further leaks. If foreign governments perceive that the United States is suppressing information, they may release intelligence of their own. Epstein's networks were global. If Poland or another ally reveals corroborating evidence that Trump's circle was implicated, the damage could be irreparable. NATO is an alliance built on trust. Member states rely on each other not only for military commitments, but also for moral credibility. If Trump is seen as covering up for Epstein while dismissing survivors, allies may question whether he can be trusted in crisis. Poland, facing direct Russian aggression on its border, cannot afford an ally whose attention is consumed by scandal. Consider the message to Moscow. If Russian leaders see a NATO figurehead unraveling under questions about Epstein, they may interpret it as weakness. Disinformation campaigns could exploit the scandal, amplifying doubts within European publics about American leadership. For NATO, credibility is as important as military hardware. A compromised leader threatens both. If Poland demands answers, it could trigger debates within NATO about accountability standards. Should alliance leaders be required to demonstrate transparency on issues of corruption and abuse? Should there be mechanisms to prevent compromised figures from undermining trust? These are not theoretical questions. They go to the heart of whether NATO can survive in an era where disinformation and scandal are weaponized tools of war. Back in the United States, the image of Trump flailing beside Poland's president could reshape political narratives. Supporters will claim he is being persecuted. They will cheer his defiance, but moderates and independents may see only chaos. If foreign leaders are pressing Trump about Epstein, it becomes harder for him to argue that the scandal is irrelevant. It becomes harder to dismiss it as partisan noise. The timing matters. As election cycles heat up, voters will be inundated with images. A clip of Trump calling victims a hoax, while Poland's leader looks on uncomfortably, could dominate headlines. Campaign ads could replay the footage, framing Trump as out of touch and morally bankrupt. Legal proceedings in the United States could accelerate if international pressure mounts. Prosecutors who might have hesitated could feel emboldened if allies demand justice. Republican rivals would also seize the moment. They could argue that Trump is unelectable, too compromised to lead. Even within his own party, doubts would deepen. For donors, the risk of being tied to a man under international scrutiny would grow unbearable. For the Republican establishment, the question would shift from whether to support Trump to how to manage his collapse. Poland has leverage that few other allies possess. Its role in supporting Ukraine gives it moral authority in the alliance. Its willingness to confront authoritarian tendencies at home and abroad gives it credibility in debates about justice. If Polish leaders decide to raise Epstein in bilateral talks or press conferences, they know the world will listen. Poland can also frame the issue not as interference in U.S. politics, but as a question of shared values. Human trafficking is a global crime. If a major leader dismisses survivors, it undermines international cooperation. By demanding answers, Poland would not be targeting Trump alone. It would be defending a principle. This framing makes it difficult for Trump to retaliate without appearing to oppose the fight against trafficking. Moreover, Poland's voice carries symbolic weight. In American memory, Poland is linked with courage, from solidarity to Pope John Paul II. If Poland demands answers, it is not just another ally speaking. It is a country with a moral reputation challenging a president who appears morally compromised. Imagine the scene. A Polish journalist stands at a joint press conference and asks Trump directly, "Mr. President, do you still believe that the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein are part of a hoax? Do you believe the women speaking at Capitol Hill are lying?" The room falls silent. Cameras capture Trump's reaction. If he doubles down, dismissing them as fabrications, he alienates not only Poland, but the broader international community. If he backtracks, admitting the seriousness of the scandal, he exposes the contradictions of his previous rhetoric. Either way, he loses control of the narrative. Such a moment would reverberate across headlines. It would dominate international news cycles. Commentators would parse every word, every gesture. Analysts would compare it to past scandals where leaders were cornered by allies. The symbolism would be unavoidable. Trump, seated beside Poland, unable to evade accountability. This is the risk he faces if Poland demands answers. It is the risk of losing control of the story, not just domestically, but globally. The Oval Office press conference with Poland was meant to project strength. Instead, it revealed fragility. Trump's attempts to brand the Epstein scandal a hoax backfired, highlighting his defensiveness and his disregard for survivors. His meandering answers on Ukraine deepened doubts about his competence. His personal attacks on domestic rivals underscored his inability to focus on the gravity of the moment. If Poland demands answers on Epstein, the consequences could be seismic. Legally, it could accelerate investigations. Diplomatically, it could shatter trust within NATO. Politically, it could erode Trump's support at home. For Poland, it would be an act of moral clarity. For the United States, it would be a test of whether accountability transcends partisanship. The broader lesson is clear. Scandals cannot be willed away by branding them hoaxes. Survivors will not be silenced. Allies will not always play along. When truth collides with power, even the most forceful denials crumble. And if Poland chooses to press Trump for answers on Epstein, it may be the moment when denial finally meets its limit.